Okay.
Well, hi, my name is Katrina Strathmann. For those that are in the room and not in the room, I see familiar faces here at the Recovery Board. I am a restoration ecologist and the Riparian program director for Mid-Columbia Fisheries. And it's been a couple of years since I've been in front of the surfboard tag. So hi again. Typically, I have come to this group with stewardship projects from surfboard projects that are in the maintenance until establishment phase, and we haven't taken any projects there. So I'm talking today about a riparian grant program project, which is a stewardship project for Lower Cowiche Creek at River Mile 1. And this was funded, the implementation was funded by two surfboard grants, 21-11-97 and 22-15-73. And there's yet another grant that funded design that went back from an 2011 grant round. Okay, so this is located in the middle Yakima River. It's in the lower reach of Cowiche Creek, in the lower reach of the Natees watershed, which, as you know, is a major tributary to the Yakima. And this is important habitat for numerous fish species. Reds have been documented in the lower reach of Cowiche Creek in years past. The data that has been updated since 2020, but I'm showing you the red data through 2020. For coho. So I'm not gonna linger on that since this is an implemented project as opposed to a new project. But I did want to point out that the limiting factors that were addressed by implementation affected all life stages. So this is a place we got involved in this project because Cowiche Creek has a very simplified stream channel. So the biggest thing that we were trying to affect was vertical and horizontal complexity, stream complexity, and also reconnect floodplains, which is part of Natee's Action 19 in the recovery plan. However, now that the project is implemented, the limiting factor is really about temperature. So we've removed a berm, recontoured a floodplain. There was not great, there was very poor quality riparian habitat before we did the floodplain reconnection, and now there's very little vegetation that is mature at this point. It just got planted in 22. So I'm going to walk you through the earlier project that got us to this point and what we're proposing. So just to put this in context, there are 3 other projects, floodplain restoration projects that have been done in this lower 3 miles. So all within 2 miles of each other in the lowest 3 miles of Cowiche Creek. And these were funded by RCO. The acquisition and initial restoration was funded by RCO money in 2007. And that included a property that was restored where a house and orchard were removed. Does that work? Yeah, house and orchard were restored upstream, and another in 2010 in a mile downstream, and then in 2011, this whole project area was funded, but because of some cultural resource issues from the historic railroad grade. That project was the larger project that we implemented in 23 was put on hold, and there was a floodplain restoration where we pulled out a bunch of concrete, recontoured banks, and revegetated in 2017. So we're talking today about the project that was just implemented. So it's happening, or it happened in a context of a lot of other work. So this project that was just implemented in 23 involved removal of a railroad grade, and so we can see the berm, railroad berm free project. This is about 5 to 8 foot high and probably 15 feet across at its base or larger. So we are in construction, and you can really get a good sense of the berm during, its removal. And then here's our regraded floodplain that, about a third of that is activated in the 2-year flood at this point. It might be more. We don't have the as-built, any as-built survey or LiDAR obviously yet. Okay, so we also, to address that in-stream habitat issue or the issues, 13 wood structures were installed in the creek and on the banks to create scour and grade gravels. And then we also planted in 2 subsites over 3,000 trees, shrubs, and a bunch of wetland plants, because there are a couple of wetland swales in the project area. So here's what that project area looks like, and what our kind of an implementation plan was last year. The dark green are the areas that we planted in riparian habitat with shrubs and trees. The light green is the first staging and access area that we rehabbed with native bunch grasses. And then you can see the wood structures that were installed in the creek. And so up and upstream and downstream project area. So I want to talk now about what stewardship looks like and why we did what we did from a riparian perspective. So I started putting this together as site challenges, and about 30 seconds into it was stopped myself and said, these are all the things that we're looking for function on, but they just happen to be challenges when you're getting a site started from year 0. So one thing that we have in Cowiche Creek is a flashy watershed, meaning that it's a lower elevation watershed. There are a lot of rain on snow events. We're also at the mouth of this lower elevation watershed. So velocities are high and flood events can happen fast. And so here we are in the 2016 flood, and this is one of the middle sites that was restored in 2010 in that February 2016 flood. And here's our downstream site where we did revegetation in 2017. So water gets out on the floodplain regularly in Cowiche Creek. So we've got this flashy watershed. So we're going to be seeing frequent floods that are high velocity. So we also have variable elevations, which is great. That gives us habitat heterogeneity. We also want floodplain connection. That's why we did the darn project. But if you've ever tried to plant in a location where you have really high velocities, and at regular flood flows, like this area, you can see that this area in here in the project area that was planted last year is all seeing, we didn't even have a really high flood year this winter. So trying to plant in those conditions is one thing that we're dealing with. And in certain areas like the downstream site, we actually installed what we have been advised to call a temporary plant protection post, temporary plant protection posts that are going to catch material before it hits both our beaver deterrent fence or shears off plantings. So in addition to those low elevation areas, like the one that you just saw from a different angle, we have a couple other, as I showed you in the other upstream site, there's a lot of area up there that's connected at the 2-year flood. We also have some upper terraces. Again, great to have the topographic variation, but it does mean that these high plantings are 5 to 8 feet above summer water and are going to need irrigation. So I'm showing you all this because one of the things that we're going to look at is, so what are the conditions? Why are you doing what you are proposing, and what does it cost? Like, what are we getting? So our goal is to have live riparian habitat with tree overstory as mature plants. So we're not installing all these plants so that we can check a box and tell you that we planted 3,000 plants. We actually want to have a thriving, robust riparian habitat that's creating overstory. So there's also, as I mentioned, where you probably gathered, there's heavy beaver use in this area. We've seen dams form in this area of the project area. We know that beaver predation is heaviest within really only about 50 feet of a dam or lodge. So we wanted to know where those dams and lodges occur, so that if they were all up here, we might take a different approach. Well, the dams and lodges were really all in the downstream section of the project, but there was heavy present beaver activity, very recent beaver activity, meaning there's chlorophyll still present in the chewed material. So it was definitely chews of the year that we saw all up through the project area. And we documented the relative incidence of, thank you, of this use. Okay, so because of that, we chose to install a beaver deterrent fence. We also planted this site upside, what I like to say is upside down, where we put the species that are preferred beaver food species inside the fence, and then transitional species like chokecherry, golden currant, black hawthorn outside the fence adjacent to the bank, which is very atypical. I've never done this before, but I was really determined to not put 3,000 plants in the ground and have that cost lost as beaver food within the first 6 months. Another challenge is high visibility. Adjacent to the project is a trail that is currently being constructed. The bridge was set last winter by the city of Yakima. This is not our project, it is an associated project. So the bridge is right here. Here's a view. Oops. The bridge here is located right there. So the view from that bridge is very bird's eye right onto our project area. So super important that we do a good job in this on this project. And I just want to point out that that really having these well-maintained, successful projects, especially high visibility projects like this, is important. Now that we've stepped into the water of installing this Cowiche Creek project, now that the city, particularly now that the city has installed this bridge, it's really important for us to not, Mid-Columbia Fisheries has a perspective that failure is not optional because it's going to affect a lot more than just this individual project. So we were fortunate, we are actually partnering with the city of Yakima to do habitat restoration on the trail project. So they're coordinating with us so that there's kind of a successful, more seamless riparian bank habitat. I'm gonna move us along. We've also got a lot of edge effect. So another challenge that we have is invasive plants. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about that, but in doing invasive plant management is very expensive, especially when you've got a planted site. You're really limited largely by hand work, whether that's spot spraying or hand removal, or running a brush cutter. It's very hard to do kind of mechanical, larger scale work. Okay. So here's what we're proposing in this project is weed management around the plantings. This is during 2024. I don't know that everybody can see that, but it's 2024 through 2027. So essentially, if year one is on the 5-year plan of riparian stewardship, year one is installation. We're proposing 4 years of stewardship to plant establishment. And that is something that Mid-Columbia Fisheries has really been focused on and trying to educate our funders about how long it takes to get plants to get their roots established and to be able to walk away from a project. So we also are going to be doing irrigation of those high areas. We estimated that that's about 300 or 400 plants. We need to rehabilitate the 2 staging areas that are on private property here and here. This one is already, is just in a maintenance phase. This one still needs to be seeded. And then, we have some beaver deterrent fence maintenance. So one of the things that everybody asks me about riparian work, especially the multi-year, nature of it, is why does it cost so much? So I tried to break this down. You guys will have this presentation, and I can also add these as attachments in, thank you, in our application. But I wanted you to see that the greatest cost per year is the weed management. But some of those other costs are significant, but not, they don't last for a long time. So like our staging and access areas, that cost is not, it's an installation fee cost for our first year, but the weed management on that is pretty low because those are areas where we can do broadcasts. So I just wanted to break that down for you, because I think when you see, wow, it costs $100,000 a year to do a project like this, it can be shocking. It's even shocking to me, but when you break it down, it's a little bit more understandable. The other thing that I wanted to point out with our budgets is that we are committed to paying a living wage for the technicians that work for us, and that is a change probably over the last 5 years generally within our industry. And that in that way, we have been able to recruit and retain some highly skilled technicians that implement this work. So it's not an inflated wage. We're at least paying them with a little bit more than what they could earn if they were working at McDonald's, which is, not what the going wages used to be. I wanted to roll this up into a budget that shows us what the partner funding is and what the total cost is for this work. So, so we have right now a little bit of money left in our surfboard project, that is about 30,000 in that implementation budget. We also just received, in less than a week ago, we received notification that we will be funded for a Department of Ecology small grant to support stewardship. We've also put in a riparian application to the Conservation Commission's riparian grant program. We don't know if we'll be successful yet with that. If all of these secured and requested funds come through, this would be our total request to surfboard. And Elizabeth, if you're out there, this budget has been modified based on our Hussman grant award. So you'll be seeing a new budget being uploaded to PRISM, a revised budget.
But your current surfboard budget request is what?
The current surfboard budget is about 200,000. So we also went through and modified. We went through and revised our budget to reflect the Hussman and we hadn't accounted for the surfboard.
Yes.
Funds that we're remaining.
When do you learn on the WS?
I don't know, it's rolling. This was the first grant that we put into the Conservation Commission and we don't know. So the next thing I wanted to show you is what happens if we don't get those funds. And I'm pushing forward only because your wonderful new colleague is encouraging me to wrap up. So I just wanted to show you guys that really what we're looking at, if this is, if our Conservation Commission is unfunded, that it would add in 24 and 25, which then increases our request to 24.
And the question was simply, do you think you'll know before June when the final applications are?
I would anticipate, yeah.
Okay, that's my follow-up.
Yeah. And I can leave us on this for a little bit if anybody wants to look at numbers. So with that, do you have any questions for me, us?
I had one or two. what needs for the weed removal and irrigation?
We were considering, we've been considering doing hand irrigation, which is not my favorite. We've really moved to drip irrigation, which has a larger initial, like a larger upfront cost, but it is much more effective and it's also more cost effective. It's lower labor costs, but the goal of irrigation is to help those plants to develop deep roots. So you're considering how to irrigate that deep soil column. And if you're irrigating it with drip and you're delivering 1 gallon per hour or 2 gallons per hour, you really are able to water that soil, deep soil column and get the roots to go down and meet groundwater, as opposed to, you know, if you're standing there with a hose, most of that water is gonna run off, and I'm really not a fan of that. So we're actually currently doing the cost analysis. Now that things are starting to green up and we're getting a sense of how many we're gonna need to irrigate. We'll make that decision soon, but this budget allows us to do either of those options.
And then the weeds hand hold or chemicals? Or-
It's actually the whole spectrum. So in the larger staging areas, we're doing a broadleaf herbicide application. We'll be doing hand pull, spot spray, and brush cutting within the planted area, depending on what spacing is like and what the weeds are. Yeah, thank you.
The size and acreage as well.
The planted area is for the surfboard application, down to the hundredths of an acre, 2.02 acres in our metrics. And I believe that the total, I'll have to look at what the total, stream feet is. I know it's 900, no, that's 850 berm feet.
The other questions?
Can you remind me again what was the cost for that 90-degree turn right there? Again, what was that? I know it's in that out there, for the stream just as a.
Oh, where the cost, what the cost was for that? You know, of the log structure. Let's go back to a map so everybody can see. So it's not, the stream isn't showing it, but you're talking about the log
that right
structure
there,
that went
yeah.
in right here. I don't know what Zach Sakavish, my colleague, implemented the construction of the project, and the log structures, and I don't know, but I can get you that number.
No, I mean, why does the stream just turn?
Oh, why does it do that?
Yeah, was it engineered to do that or? Yeah.
I'm sorry. I
Yeah,
didn't
and why-
understand your question.
Yeah.
No, that actually was put in place by the railroad berm. So the
Oh,
railroad
yeah.
berm runs this way
Right.
and it crossed a creek. And so they dumped a bunch of slabs of
Yeah.
concrete and a whole bunch of junk in there to keep the creek in place.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
that's. what I-
Yeah, so what we did here for the implementation of the project is we took out the berm to about here. And then also took out a bunch of material here and created kind of a training swale so that the creek in low flow, it's gonna stay in the channel, but in high flow, it can do this. So it activates that.
Anybody else? Elizabeth offered that it might be helpful if the application could be updated before site visits, unless you expect to get additional info before the final application that will change the surfboard request further.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Have you had any incursions into your fencing by beavers or dropping trees onto your fencing?
No, surprisingly, we've been keeping our eyes on it over the winter, not knowing what to expect. There was a beaver slide that developed, so there's a wetland right here, wetland swale, and a beaver slide developed right here during construction. So while heavy equipment was moving back and forth on the site, and I thought, oh boy, we're sunk, and which is why I was so aggressive about the fence. If I hadn't seen active beaver activity on the site, I might have taken a different approach, but we haven't lost any plants. And again, inside the fence, that's where we planted our preferred food species. We have a few, cottonwood and willow that are outside the fence, and those haven't been touched either. So I don't know if they just haven't figured it out yet. We have another project that, we did a similar beaver, fence on, and 7 years into the project, the beaver finally dug a hole and just raised the whole thing. Some of them are resprouting. So that's the goal, is to not keep the beaver out. Thanks for actually asking that question, because I wanted to communicate that. That the goal of the beaver fence is not to keep them out forever, but we really want to get those roots established so they have the capacity to resprout. When they're new plants, those fine roots haven't developed. They don't have an extensive root system, so if they're mowed down by beaver, that's it. We've wasted the cost of the plant material and the cost to get them in, and any maintenance up to that point. So we're trying to get them to the point where they will pop us and resprout. And I think that's it,
Okay,
unless there's one.
unless there's any more questions. All right, thank you much, Gavin.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kat.